What's up, guys? I'm DK, and you're watching Pro Wrestling What If, the series where I look at the different what if scenarios as terms of the world that we call professional wrestling. This weekend is Survivor Series War Games in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, on the other side of the country in which I live in. But that's besides the point, because today, with Survivor Series Long Lineage, we are going to be looking at every single Survivor Series event that has taken place since the inaugural event in 1987 all the way up until the most recent one as of the recording of this video, in determining what the main event would be if it was different. So I guess for this video, let the War Games begin! Look, I know I'm not as good as William Regal, but let's get right to it. And if you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share this to all your friends, subscribe, and press the notification bell for when future episodes get released, and leave a comment down below about today's topic or suggesting a future topic for an episode of Pro Wrestling What If. So starting off with Survivor Series 1987, the main event was Bam Bam Bigelow, Don Morocco, Hulk Hogan, Ken Patera, and Paul Orndorff against Andre the Giant, Butch Reed, King Kong Bundy, One Man Gang, and Rick Rude in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the British Bulldogs, Killer Bees, Fabulous Rougeaus, Strike Force, and the Young Stallions against the Bolsheviks, Demolition, Dream Team, Hart Foundation, and the Islanders in the 10-on-10 Survivor Series elimination match. I think my logical answer for this is the fact that every Survivor Series match that was involved with the show was 5-on-5, except this one, which was 10-on-10. So because there's more people and the match would be longer, is why I think this would be the main event instead of what it actually was. Survivor Series 1988, the main event was Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Hercules, Coco Beware, and Hillbilly Jim against Akeem, Big Boss Man, Ted DiBiase, King Haku, and the Red Rooster in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Powers of Pain, the Rockers, British Bulldogs, Hart Foundation, and the Young Stallions against Demolition, the Brainbusters, the Bolsheviks, the Fabulous Rougeaus, and the Conquistadors in the 10-on-10 Survivor Series elimination match. Same reason as I mentioned with 1987. Survivor Series 1989, the main event was the Ultimate Warriors, featuring Ultimate Warrior, Jim Neidhart, and the Rockers against the Heenan family, featuring Bobby Heenan, Andre the Giant, Haku, and Arn Anderson in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Hulkamaniacs, featuring Hulk Hogan, Jake Roberts, and Demolition against the $1 Million Team, featuring Ted DiBiase, the Powers of Pain, and Zeus in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. And this mainly is because, of course, Hulk Hogan was the biggest face of the company during the golden era, so in most cases that Hulk Hogan should be the main event of the pay-per-view, and it was really surprising that he wasn't for this event. Survivor Series 1990, the main event was Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and Tito Santana against Ted DiBiase, Rick Martel, the Warlord, Hercules, and Paul Roma in the 5-on-3 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Hulkamaniacs, featuring Hulk Hogan, Jim Duggan, Big Boss Man, and Tugboat against the Natural Disasters, featuring Earthquake, Haku, Dino Bravo, and the Barbarian in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, this event was really interesting, considering the reason the main event was 5-on-3 was because they took the sole survivors of the other Survivor Series elimination matches, and there so happened to be only 3 baby faces and 5 heels left over. So had this concept not actually been done, it's like what I mentioned with 1989, and that because Hulk Hogan is the biggest face of the company at the time, that he would likely be in the main event no matter what match he was in. Survivor Series 1991, the main event was the Big Boss Man and the Legion of Doom against IRS and the Natural Disasters in the 3-on-3 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been Undertaker versus Hulk Hogan for the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Not only because Hulk Hogan being the face of the company, but because the World Wrestling Federation Championship was on the line for the first time at Survivor Series at this time. And even though that the ending was the fact that the Undertaker did win thanks to interference from Ric Flair, this would have added quite a bit of shocking value to end off a pay-per-view like Survivor Series. Survivor Series 1992, the main event was Shawn Michaels against Bret Hart for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, but but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Randy Savage and Mr. Perfect against Razor Ramon and Ric Flair. Now, I feel like originally this tag match was going to be the main event, because originally this tag match was advertised as Razor Ramon and Ric Flair against Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior, known as the Ultimate Maniacs. However, with arguments with management and the ongoing steroid allegations, Ultimate Warrior had ended up leaving shortly before this event happened, and that resulted in the idea of turning Mr. Perfect from being a heel to a babyface to fill the slot. So based off of star power and not the fact that there's a title on the line, this likely would have been the main event. Survivor Series 1993, the main event was the All-Americans featuring Lex Luger, the Steiner Brothers, and The Undertaker against the Foreign Fanatics featuring Crush, Quebec Jacques, Ludwig Borga, and Yokozuna in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Hart family featuring Bret, Bruce, Keith, and Owen Hart against Shawn Michaels and his Knights in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, although the actual main event did make sense because it featured the World Wrestling Federation champion Yokozuna, I think this other Survivor Series match would have made sense considering of what it ended up building, which was starting the seeds for the eventual Bret versus Owen Hart match at WrestleMania 10. Survivor Series 1994, the main event was Undertaker against Yokozuna in a casket match with Chuck Norris as the special outside enforcer, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Bob Backlund versus Bret Hart for the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Now, although it was weird to actually see Bob Backlund with a second reign as world champion, which we did cover a couple of weeks ago here on Pro Wrestling What If, but I think just like I mentioned with, I think it was 1991 with Undertaker and Hogan, because there was a shock value in the fact that Bob Backlund actually won the title, although having Chuck Norris as a part of the actual main event is pretty badass, not gonna lie. Survivor Series 1995, the main event was Bret Hart versus Diesel in a no disqualification match for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Shawn Michaels, Ahmed Johnson, British Bulldog, and Psycho Sid against Yokozuna, Owen Hart, Razor Ramon, and Dean Douglas in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, I think this mainly is because out of all the Survivor Series elimination matches, this one had the most star power out of them. Survivor Series 1996, the main event was Psycho Sid versus Shawn Michaels for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in the World Wrestling Federation Championship #1 contender match. Now, this match already had a bit of anticipation because I believe this was Bret Hart's first match back since the famous Iron Man match that took place at WrestleMania 12. So having a rising heel like Stone Cold Steve Austin facing a returning big baby face like Bret Hart at this point would make sense to put in the main event instead of the world title match. Survivor Series 1997, the main event was Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Canada featuring British Bulldog, Jim Neidhart, Doug Furness, and Phil LaFawn against Team USA featuring Vader, Goldust, Mark Merrow, and Steve Blackman in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, this one was very difficult because how do you top off what ended up being the Montreal Screwjob? Once again, another topic we discussed about a few weeks ago here on Pro Wrestling What If. So if somehow that match wasn't the main event and you had something to close off to kind of send the crowd home happy, it probably would be this specific Survivor Series elimination match where Team Canada ended up pulling the victory. Survivor Series 1998, the main event was Mankind versus The Rock in the Deadly Games Tournament Finals to determine the World Wrestling Federation champion, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry against the Headbangers and the New Age Outlaws in the Triple Threat Tag Team match for the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championships. Now, this one was a bit weird to do because the majority of the card was the tournament, so there's only a select few non-tournament matches, so I felt like this tag team match, especially with a hot tag team like the New Age Outlaws, could have been a viable match as the main event. Survivor Series 1999, the main event was The Big Show, The Rock, and Triple H in a triple threat match for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Al Snow and Mankind against the New Age Outlaws for the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championships. Now, once again, this card was a bit weird, not because there was a tournament involved, because there wasn't a lot of matches that just screamed out that they could be the main event besides this triple threat match. So I think with, once again, a big tag team like the New Age Outlaws, and especially Mankind, who was previously a world champion, there's a bit of star power there. Survivor Series 2000, the main event was Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Triple H in a no disqualification match, but had it not been that match, match, I think it would have been The Undertaker versus Kurt Angle for the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Now, of course, not only because this match was for the main championship of the company and makes sense, but at the same time, it was a little bit weird that the main event for Stone Cold and Triple H actually ended in a no contest, so at least with the world title match, there would have been a definitive finish to close out the show. Survivor Series 2001, the main event was Team World Wrestling Federation, featuring The Rock, Undertaker, Kane, Big Show, and Chris Jericho against Team Alliance featuring Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Rob Van Dam, Booker T, and Shane McMahon in the winner-takes-all 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Hardy Boys versus the Dudley Boys in the steel cage match to unify the WCW and World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championships. Now, once again, this card was weird because the entire night was determining about unifying championships and whether it was going to be WCW or the World Wrestling Federation that would continue on as a company. So had the Survivor Series match not been the main event, it's almost like any other match after that would be really pointless, except the fact that at least I know that the Hardy Boys and the Dudley Boys, with prior matches they had, would put out such a banger match that could close out as a great main event. Survivor Series 2002, the main event was Booker T, Chris Jericho, Kane, Rob Van Dam, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H in an Elimination Chamber match for the World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Big Show versus Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship. Now, this is one of those cases that I've said in previous videos where if one world title isn't main eventing, it realistically should be the other one. Survivor Series 2003, the main event was Triple H against Goldberg for the World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Undertaker versus Mr. McMahon in a Buried Alive match. Now, although I did mention about if one world title isn't on the line for the main event, it should be the other. However, Brock Lesnar, the WWE champion at the time, was involved in a Survivor Series match, so the title wasn't even on the line. But the Buried Alive match at least had a little bit of storyline aspects where we did see Kane help Mr. McMahon defeat The Undertaker, burying him alive, and eventually seeing the return of the Dead Man gimmick when we arrived at WrestleMania 20. Survivor Series 2004, the main event was Team Orton featuring Randy Orton, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, and Maven against Team Triple H featuring Triple H, Batista, Edge, and Gene Snitsky in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series elimination match. But if it wasn't that, I unfortunately think it would be Undertaker versus Heidenreich. And I know you guys are probably screaming in the comment section below that I said that, and that's why I said unfortunately. Although most of you would probably say that the main event should be JBL versus Booker T in this instance. However, I think that Vince McMahon would probably think that JBL and Booker T aren't big enough stars to have a main event spot like this. So with a guy like Undertaker, whose name value is probably bigger than both Booker T and JBL put together, that it's likely that he would take the spot as the main event, even though we all know how that match ended up turning out to be. Survivor Series 2005, the main event was Team Raw featuring Big Show, Carlito, Chris Masters, Kane, and Shawn Michaels against Team SmackDown featuring Batista, Bobby Lashley, JBL, Randy Orton, and Rey Mysterio in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. However, if that wasn't the main event, I think it would have been Kurt Angle versus John Cena for the WWE Championship with Daivari as the special guest referee. Now, although the actual main event was decent for the fact of Undertaker's return at the end of the match, if we're talking actual match quality value of what should be the main event, it would likely go to the brand new face of the company at the time, John Cena, and of course a workhorse machine like the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle. Survivor Series 2006, the main event was Batista versus King Booker in a last chance match for the World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Cena featuring John Cena, Bobby Lashley, Kane, Rob Van Dam, and Sabu against Team Big Show featuring Big Show, Finlay, MVP, Test, and Umaga in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, I think this is a case where I mentioned earlier about Hulk Hogan while being the face of the company, the fact that at this point I feel like almost every pay-per-view had John Cena as the main event, so it would make sense if it wasn't that world title match with a little bit of stakes that it would be John Cena taking that main event spot. Survivor Series 2007, the main event was Undertaker versus Batista inside Hell in a Cell for the World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Shawn Michaels versus Randy Orton for the WWE Championship. Now, once again, it's one of those facts of, if it's not one world title, it should be the other, and especially with two big enough superstars like Shawn Michaels and Randy Orton, it would be viable for them to take the main event spot, although it would be weird to not see the Hell Hell in a Cell structure be the main event of that show. Survivor Series 2008, the main event was John Cena versus Chris Jericho for the World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Edge, Vladimir Kozlov, and Triple H in a triple threat match for the WWE Championship. Now, I think the reason of Cena and Jericho main eventing in the real timeline was what I mentioned about 2006, is that at this point, Cena's the face of the company, he realistically should be the main event of the majority of the shows. And so I think that may be a reason why the triple threat match wasn't the main event, especially with the lack of star power with Vladimir Kozlov in that match. But it's the fact, once again, if one world title isn't main eventing, it's gotta be the other in this case. Survivor Series 2009, the main event was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and John Cena in a triple threat match for the WWE Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Big Show, Chris Jericho, and Undertaker in the triple threat match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Funny enough that both of these matches were triple threat matches, but it was the right decision with more star power to have the WWE Championship triple threat match be the main event, but once again, if it's not one world title, it's gotta be another. Survivor Series 2010, the main event was Wade Barrett versus Randy Orton in a pin or submission only match for the WWE Championship with John Cena as the special guest referee, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Edge versus Kane for the World Heavyweight Championship. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's what I mentioned the last two times about world titles, and you know the phrase that I mentioned. Yet there was definitely more at stake when it came to the WWE Championship match than there was with the World Heavyweight. Survivor Series 2011, the main event was John Cena and The Rock against the Awesome Truth featuring Miz and R-Truth in a tag team match, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been CM Punk versus Alberto Del Rio for the WWE Championship. So pretty much for this main event to actually happen, we pretty much can't have Rock on the show, but if Rock is on the show, he is likely taking the main event spot no matter whether it's WrestleMania, Survivor Series, or even a B-show event if he was on it. But I think it comes down to the two world title matches as different options, and it seems like there was more storyline aspects between CM Punk and Del Rio, rather than I believe it was just another match between Sheamus and The Big Show for the World Heavyweight Championship. Survivor Series 2012, the main event was John Cena, Ryback, and CM Punk in a triple threat match for the WWE Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Foley featuring Daniel Bryan, Kane, Kofi Kingston, The Miz, and Randy Orton against Team Ziggler featuring Dolph Ziggler, Alberto Del Rio, Damian Sandow, David Otunga, and Wade Barrett in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, as I remember off the top of my head, I believe Sheamus and Big Show was actually 2012 because now I'm remembering about the Mark Henry Big Show rivalry, which I think was 2011. But that's besides the point. I think that, once again, the World Heavyweight Championship match was a bit lackluster to basically replace the WWE Championship match as a potential main event, so I think just keeping it simple with a traditional Survivor Series elimination match would be fine as the main event in this case. Survivor Series 2013, the main event was Big Show versus Randy Orton for the WWE Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Alberto Del Rio against John Cena for the World Heavyweight Championship. Not only, once again, because of the whole world title saying that I keep mentioning about, but of course, John Cena at this time still the face of the company, so with his star power alone, he likely could have been the main event instead of the WWE Championship match. Survivor Series 2014, the main event was Team Cena featuring John Cena, Dolph Ziggler, Eric Rowan, Big Show, and Ryback against Team Authority featuring Seth Rollins, Kane, Luke Harper, Mark Henry, and Rusev in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been Damian Mizdow and The Miz against Los Matadores, the Usos, and Goldust and Stardust in a fatal 4-way match for the Tag Team Championships. Now, while re-looking at the whole entire card, there wasn't really viable options of matches that could be the main event, and unfortunately I couldn't choose any of the women's matches because we're still at that period of time where WWE didn't really prominently feature women. Survivor Series 2015, the main event was Dean Ambrose against Roman Reigns in the tournament finals for the vacant WWE World Heavyweight Championship, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been the Brothers of Destruction against the Wyatt family in the tag team match. This specific Survivor Series event marked the 25th anniversary of The Undertaker's debut. And so this is a very easy choice that if we're not prominently featuring the World Championship in the main event, which of course ended with Sheamus cashing in anyways and kind of ruining that moment, that we would at least showcase 25 years of one of, if not the greatest professional wrestler of all time, The Undertaker, as the main event of the show. Survivor Series 2016, the main event was Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Raw featuring Braun Strowman, Chris Jericho, Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins against Team SmackDown featuring AJ Styles, Bray Wyatt, Dean Ambrose, Randy Orton, and Shane McMahon in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. This Survivor Series elimination match was one of the most stacked Survivor Series matches in recent memory, and likely would have been the main event had we not had what was the WrestleMania 20 rematch between Brock Lesnar and Goldberg. And especially this match had both the world champions of Raw and SmackDown featured in it. Survivor Series 2017, the main event was Team Raw featuring Kurt Angle, Braun Strowman, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe, and Triple H against Team SmackDown featuring Shane McMahon, Randy Orton, Bobby Roode, Shinsuke Nakamura, and John Cena in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar in the champion versus champion match. The AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar match, to this day, I still think is Brock Lesnar's best professional wrestling match since returning to WWE in 2012. Everything that went into this match, including Brock Lesnar's amazing selling, had me really upset that this wasn't the main event of the show. Of course, there were stakes involved in the Survivor Series match, and in this case, I don't think the fans really cared about the Survivor Series elimination match after seeing an amazing match between Brock Lesnar and AJ Styles. I guess they kind of rectified themselves the year after, because for Survivor Series 2018, the main event was Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar in the champion versus champion match. However, had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Raw featuring Bobby Lashley, Braun Strowman, Dolph Ziggler, Drew McIntyre, and Finn Balor against Team SmackDown featuring The Miz, Shane McMahon, Rey Mysterio, Samoa Joe, and Jeff Hardy in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. And this is what I mean. Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar, another great match. Personally, I like the AJ Styles one a bit better, but still great that this ended up main eventing, because this Team Raw versus Team SmackDown match had a little bit less star power in my opinion than the prior years, and I could have went with Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair. However, I still don't think at this time that WWE would have wanted the women to main event a show like this, which won't happen until a few months later when we look at the triple threat women's match that happened at WrestleMania 35. Survivor Series 2019, the main event was Becky Lynch, Bayley, and Shayna Baszler in the Champions Triple Threat match, but if it wasn't that match, I think it would have been Team Raw featuring Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Kevin Owens, Randy Orton, and Ricochet against Team SmackDown featuring Roman Reigns, Braun Strowman, King Corbin, Mustafa Ali, and Shorty G, and Team NXT featuring Tommaso Ciampa, Damian Priest, Matt Riddle, Keith Lee, and Walter in the 5-on-5 Triple Threat Survivor Series elimination match. Now, at this point, this is what I mentioned to where it made sense for the Triple Threat women's match to be the main event, since we already seen the women main event WrestleMania. But something about this Survivor Series match with Raw, SmackDown, and NXT was definitely one of the better produced matches in the last little while. This match definitely was one of the better Survivor Series elimination matches that I've seen since watching wrestling. Survivor Series 2020, the main event was Drew McIntyre versus Roman Reigns in the champion versus champion match, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Raw featuring AJ Styles, Keith Lee, Sheamus, Braun Strowman, and Riddle against Team SmackDown featuring Kevin Owens, Jey Uso, King Corbin, Seth Rollins, and Otis in the 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. Now, of course, it definitely made sense for Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns to be the main event, but I felt like there weren't really that many good options, especially the women's match with Sasha Banks and I believe it was Asuka, since we already seen that at SummerSlam a few months prior. So just keeping it simple with the traditional Survivor Series elimination match, especially Raw versus SmackDown, makes sense for the main event. Survivor Series 2021, the main event was Big E versus Roman Reigns in a champion versus champion match, but had it not been that match, I think it would have been Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair in the women's champion versus champion match. Say what you will about Charlotte Flair. She gets a lot of hate, but she puts on some banger matches, especially with Becky Lynch time and time again. An example I will mention is probably one of my top 5 favorite women's matches of all time, being Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair at Evolution in 2018. And so yet again, with two top performers like Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair, it it should be the women main eventing. Survivor Series 2022, the main event was Team Brawling Brutes featuring Sheamus, Butch, Rich Holland, Drew McIntyre, and Kevin Owens against the Bloodline featuring Roman Reigns, the Usos, Solo Sikoa, and Sami Zayn in the men's War Games match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been Team Belair featuring Bianca Belair, Alexa Bliss, Asuka, Mia Yim, and Becky Lynch against Team Damage Control featuring Bayley, Io Sky, Dakota Kai, Nikki Cross, and Rhea Ripley in the women's War Games match. And I might as well mention about 2023 Survivor Series, which the main event was Cody Rhodes, Seth Rollins, Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, and a returning Randy Orton against Team Judgment Day featuring Damian Priest, Finn Balor, Dominic Mysterio, JD McDonough, and Drew McIntyre in the men's War Games match. But had it not been that match, I think it would have been Bianca Belair, Charlotte Flair, Shotzi, and Becky Lynch against Damage Control featuring Bayley, Asuka, Io Sky, and Kairi Sane in the women's War Games match. And I said those back to back because I feel like for years to come it would be the same thing over again.